There are traditions, aren't there? Comforting rituals that bind families together like stitches in a quilt, Christmas mornings, summer barbecues. But some traditions, well, some carry a different weight. They belong to the shadows, to the crisp autumn air, thick with the scent of decaying leaves and whispered secrets. Tonight, from the pages of this old volume, I share one such tale, a story of a father, a son, and a walk taken on the edge of darkness. Gather round, my dear listeners, for tonight's tale is one of lingering spirits and a promise kept beyond the grave. Every town has its traditions, but in Blackwood, ours involves a torch and the dead who follow its light. Meet Thomas Abernathy and his son, young James. Every Halloween, after the costumes were hung up and the candy counted, Thomas would retrieve the torch. Not just any torch, mind you. A heavy brass heirloom passed down through Abernathy hands, its beam seeming to cut through more than just the physical dark. Their ritual? A walk through the St. Augustine churchyard. Thomas wasn't cruel, but he loved a good ghost story. And what better place? He'd lower his voice, pointing the torch beam. They say old man Hemlock still searches for his lost spectacles among these stones, he'd whisper, a grin playing on his lips. Young James would shiver, half terror, half delight, squeezing his father's hand until his knuckles were white. The torch, warm and solid, was his anchor in the sea of shadows. Year after year, the tradition held. Halloween night, the walk through St. Augustine's. James grew taller, his voice deepened. The shivering fear gave way to teenage eye rolls, though a sliver of that childhood apprehension always remained. The stories became familiar, comforting in their predictability, yet the graveyard, it never lost its chilling power, the weight of history, the silent audience beneath their feet. And always there was the torch, its familiar heft, the click of its switch, the unwavering beam that seemed to hold a warmth beyond mere electricity. It was more than just metal and glass. It was a connection, a tangible piece of their shared history, lighting the path through darkness, both literal and metaphorical. But time, as it must, moved relentlessly onward. One spring, Thomas Abernathy succumbed to a sudden illness. The loss was a gaping wound in James's young life. Amidst the grief and the stark finality of the funeral preparations, Thomas's final wish came to light, relayed through his tearful wife. He wanted to be buried with the torch. It lit my way in life, he'd apparently told his wife weeks before, perhaps sensing the encroaching shadows. Let it light my way in, whatever comes next. And so, the Abernathy heirloom, the guardian against the Halloween dark, was laid to rest beside the man who had cherished it. The following Halloween arrived, draped in a chilling fog in the heavy cloak of James's grief. The familiar ritual now felt alien, daunting. Trick-or-treating felt hollow. But tradition demanded he walk the path. Armed with a flimsy store-bought flashlight, a poor imitation of the stalwart brass sentinel now 6 feet under, James pushed open the protesting wrought iron gates of St. Augustine's. The silence was different tonight, not peaceful, but watchful. The usual playful whispers of his father's stories were replaced by the dry skittering of unseen things in the leaf litter. A sudden, unnatural chill, colder than the October air, snaked down his spine, raising goosebumps beneath his coat. Just the wind, he told himself, but his heart hammered against his ribs. Then came the rustling, closer this time, just behind a looming granite angel. Not leaves, heavier, like fabric dragging. He spun around, flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc. Nothing, only the impassive stone faces of the long dead. He quickened his pace, the gravel crunching too loudly underfoot. Then, footsteps, unmistakable, pacing him just beyond the reach of his weak light. Slow, deliberate. He didn't dare look back again. He almost ran, his breath catching in his throat, a cold sweat prickling his brow. Finally, stumbling, heart pounding like a drum against stone, he reached the familiar plot, his father's grave. He leaned against a neighboring headstone, gasping for air. But the air here, it was strangely different. The biting chill was gone, replaced by an odd, localized warmth. And the flowers he'd left just days before, they were glowing. A soft, pulsing, golden light emanated from the petals, casting strange shadows on the earth. He stared, bewildered. Then he heard it, faint but undeniable, breathing, slow, steady, right beside him. A phantom warmth brushed his cheek. Before terror could fully seize him, his eyes caught something on the grave itself. Lying squarely in the center of the mound, impossibly, inexplicably, was the brass torch, his father's torch, and it was on, its powerful beam cutting a perfect, unwavering column into the misty night sky. Hesitantly, almost reverently, James reached down. His fingers closed around the familiar patterned grip. It felt warm, not just illuminated, but physically warm, as if it had been held only moments before. The cold dread that had chased him through the graveyard evaporated, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming wave of something else. Not quite comfort, not quite fear, but a profound, aching sense of presence. He stood there for a long time, bathed in the impossible light of the torch returned from the earth. But the warmth, it wasn't just residual heat. It pulsed faintly, a strange energy humming within the aged brass. Driven by an instinct he didn't understand, a mix of lingering fear and newfound terrible curiosity, James raised the torch. He swept the beam slowly across the rows of silent stones, across the blackness pooled beneath the ancient yew trees. At first, nothing. Just the familiar shapes of granite and shadow, the damp earth, the skeletal fingers of bare branches. But then, there, caught in the heart of the unwavering beam, where only impenetrable shadow had been moments before, things flickered into view. Pale, translucent shapes, gaunt faces, mouths open in silent screams, eyes like burned-out coals staring back from the darkness. They recoiled from the light, shimmering like heat haze, visible only within the torch's golden gaze. He swept the beam away, and they vanished. He swept it back, and they reappeared, hateful and lost. A new, colder dread washed over James, extinguishing the lingering warmth of grief. This was the torch's secret. This was its true purpose, passed down through generations. Not just a light against the dark, but a warning beacon. The warmth he felt wasn't mere heat. It was the torch awake, sensing the spectral malignancy that festered in the graveyard shadows, revealing the unseen evil that lurked just beside the path, hungry for any Abernathy soul foolish enough to walk without protection. His father hadn't just left him a light, he'd left him a weapon, and a terrible burden. Panic clawed at his throat, screaming at him to run, to drop the cursed thing. But some deeper instinct, perhaps the Abernathy blood itself, took hold. He saw the hatred in those spectral eyes, the hunger. He tightened his grip on the pulsing warmth of the brass, not in fear now, but in defiance. He thrust the beam forward, directly into the face of the nearest, leering specter. The effect was immediate, astonishing. The creature shrieked, a silent, soul-chilling sound that echoed only in James's mind. It recoiled as if struck by lightning, its hateful form fraying like smoke in a gale where the pure light touched it. He swept the beam, and the other lurking shapes flinched back, unable to bear its cleansing radiance. The malignant spirits, those twisted by bitterness or tethered by evil, could not withstand the torch's protective fire. Then, almost without thinking, he lowered the beam, letting its glow wash over his father's resting place. The harsh, scouring intensity vanished. Here the light was different, gentle, warm, unwavering. It felt like acceptance, like peace, and for one breathtaking, impossible second, bathed in that tender radiance, he saw it. Not a horrifying specter, but a faint, familiar outline near the stone. His father. Then it was gone. The truth struck him then, profound and complete. The torch was their heritage, a shield against the grasping evil that refused to move on, a weapon to drive back the shadows. But more than that, it was a beacon, a guiding light, perhaps, for the good souls, the loving protectors like his father, offering them strength and a safe passage through the encroaching darkness until they were truly ready to cross into the final light. The footsteps were gone. The breathing had ceased. Only the familiar weight in his hand remained. Clutching the warm brass, he turned and walked out of St. Augustine's, leaving the weak beam of his modern flashlight forgotten on the path. Years turned. James Abernathy grew older, married, had children of his own, and every Halloween, after the candy and costumes, he retrieves the old brass torch. His torch now, polished and cared for. He takes his son and daughter by the hand, and together they walk the paths of St. Augustine's churchyard. He tells them the old stories, just as his father told him. He points out Old Man Hemlock's resting place. He answers their wide-eyed questions. He doesn't tell them everything about the night he walked alone. Not yet. Some chills are best saved for when they're older. But every year, as he stands before his father's grave, holding the torch that came back, he feels it, a subtle shift in the air, a warmth that shouldn't be there, and he hopes, or perhaps, sometimes, he fears, that he might feel a hand upon his shoulder once more, a final embrace from beyond the veil, or perhaps, just perhaps, a reminder that some things, once buried, don't always stay put. A comforting tradition, or a yearly invitation. Sometimes the deepest love casts the longest, coldest shadows. Sleep well, if you can. And if you enjoyed this tale from the crypt, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, if you dare. There are many more stories lurking in the pages yet to be turned.